It feels like just a couple of weeks ago that we got our first real look at the Halo TV series, even though it's been closer to 2 months. Sunday gave us the release of another Halo TV series trailer, and where the last one was more about showing us characters and set pieces to set the tone and feel, this latest trailer gives us a peek at the story 343 and Paramount are planning to tell, and a much better idea of what inspirations the team are pulling from. Like before, I'll be chopping up the trailer rather than going over it scene by scene. And at the end, I'll present what I believe will be the show's general story and structure. A bit of fun theory crafting to top off the video. So, let's begin. Like before, let's start with a look at the characters presented in this trailer, starting with Natasha McElhenn's Dr. Catherine Halsey. While we only see her a few times in the trailer, voiceover from the Doctor, now featuring a slight British accent, is present throughout the trailer. She first notes how Master Chief and the Spartans were created for the singular purpose of, quote, winning this war, that they're the only hope against the Covenant. In the core canon, Spartans were created to fight human insurrection. While this could be another instance of Halsey twisting history to her favor, it's always possible that Spartans were always created to fight the Covenant in the Silver timeline. Halsey then goes on to say that Spartans are lethal, upgradable, referencing their Mjolnir armor primarily, and controllable, referencing the brainwashing all Spartan 2 candidates were subjected to during their upbringing. Now, concerning her on-screen appearances, we have one with her seemingly presenting the Spartan 2 project to a committee or something similar. Later, we see her talking with a Fleet Admiral or 5-star Admiral, who it turns out is Fleet Admiral Lord Terrence Hood. Given that he was played by Ron Perlman in the games, a man more than capable of acting on screen, it's a little sad that Perlman isn't here to play a live-action Lord Hood. Anyway, Hood in this scene asks Halsey what to do with a superhuman you can't trust. While the trailer seems to want viewers to think Hood is referring to the Master Chief going rogue, I think it's more likely in reference to Soren 066, who we'll talk about more in just a bit. The last scene with Halsey looks to be set in her lab, a pair of Mjolnir suits behind her. Halsey looks distressed here, perhaps witnessing the ferocity of the Covenant for the first time. Next, let's quickly talk about Cortana. Revealed 1 minute and 17 seconds into the trailer, the show's take on Cortana is pretty different from what we've seen before. While still retaining something of a blue hue, she is much more human-looking, more akin to Serena than Cortana, and looks to be wearing an outfit not dissimilar from the weapons outfit in Halo Infinite. This is a separate continuity, so I'm not exactly upset with this depiction of Cortana, but more blue, more scrolling lines of code, and maybe a little transparency would have been nice. It's also rather interesting that Cortana doesn't seem to be modeled after Natasha McElhenne, or doesn't appear to be to me. Though now voiced by Jen Taylor, the original Cortana, the TV show's version was originally going to be voiced by Ms. McElhenne as well, until the pandemic created issues that required recasting Cortana. Anyway, other than her appearance here, Cortana largely doesn't feature in the trailer, save for one line mentioning her later, when the Chief says he'll need her help. While we have no context for the scene, I'd love if that were coming from an adaptation of the Mjolnir AI integration test from Halo: The Fall of Reach. After that, let's talk a bit about Miranda Keyes, portrayed in the TV show by Olive Gray. In the Silver timeline, Miranda is also a scientist as well as a naval officer, seemingly having more of a connection to both of her parents rather than just to her father. In the few scenes we get, we see Miranda and Spartan Kai 125 studying the artifact Chief recovered earlier. In one scene, we can see them working on a translation of the Covenant language, leading to the
Sacred Ring, Halo
line. I'm excited to see what the TV show does with Miranda, since she barely features outside of Halo 2 and 3 in the core canon. While the scientist angle was a bit iffy back when it was announced, if it means we might get a better understanding of the Covenant language, I'm all on board. From there, let's now discuss Kwan Ah, the new character being portrayed by actress Yaren Ha. Kwan Ah is described as a shrewd and audacious teenager who encounters the Master Chief at a pivotal point in both of their lives. Kwan features heavily in the trailer, often alongside the Master Chief, meaning she'll likely be one of the show's main characters. In the trailer, we can see her home coming under Covenant attack. The locals try to defend themselves, but it takes Spartan intervention to fight off the Covenant. During this sequence, we see this character once more, who was prominently featured in the last trailer. I'm starting to wonder if this might be Kwan's father, older brother, a legal guardian of some kind, or something else along those lines. Anyway, the Chief shows up, kicks some Covenant ass, and then rescues Kwan Ah. As the trailer progresses, we hear Kwan refer to the Chief as humanity's best weapon, and later express confusion over why a Spartan, essentially a boogeyman for insurrectionists and outer colonists alike, would help someone like her. Interestingly, she might not be talking about the Chief saving her on her homeworld, but from something else. Later in the trailer, there's a shot of this Pelican, number 325, taking off. We saw this same Pelican in the previous TV show trailer, so it seems like it'll have some important role to play, at least to some degree. In this new scene, we can see the Pelican taking off, unexpectedly based on the reactions of the Marines on the ground. A later scene shows the Pelican glowing with a green energy, the same kind of energy we saw when the Chief touches the Forerunner artifact. Perhaps this artifact and Kwan Ah were both being transported to Reach on this Pelican, and during the flight, the artifact acted up. We see this scene later of the Chief, Kwan Ah seemingly locked up in the background and banging on the glass. This could be for any number of reasons, of course, but I'm trying to put pieces together if I can. So one idea I'm thinking is that the artifact acts up, Chief saves Kwan Ah in some capacity, leading to the scene asking why he saved her. Alternatively, Kwan could be, once again, talking to Soren 066. There's a scene showing a Spartan kicking a BR over to Kwan, which I initially thought was the Chief, but this could be Soren. There are later scenes with Soren and Kwan on an unknown planet. Kwan has a visibly different outfit than the rest of her scenes in the trailer, so perhaps the pair escape Reach together. There's another quick shot in the trailer showing another Pelican, the same model as Pelican 325, flying through some asteroids, perhaps on the way to the rubble. The rubble, for anyone unaware, was a collection of asteroids connected by docking tubes used by the residents of Madrigal after their world was glassed by the Covenant. The rubble will be Soren 066's base of operations in the show. Speaking of which, let's talk about Soren 066. For a quick recap, in the core canon, Soren 066 was a washout, meaning his augmentations went wrong in some capacity, in his case, leaving him physically deformed. Reassigned to a desk job, Soren grew disillusioned with his work and eventually the UNSC as a whole, thanks in part to an insurrectionist sympathizer he worked with. During an attempted defection, the two stole a ship but were shot down over Reach. Soren was never seen or heard from again. In the Silver Timeline, however, Soren apparently has Mjolnir armor now, though it's not clear yet if it's a full suit. Still, this is a major deviation from the lore we know. We've been told that Soren's aforementioned backstory as told in the short story Pariah from Halo Evolutions will still be relevant to his Silver Timeline counterpart, though likely with some notable changes. I'm excited to see what the show does with such an interesting Spartan. Soren doesn't feature heavily in the trailer, but his one speaking scene references the Spartan 2 training and upbringing, featuring cuts to a young John 117 and what is presumably Spartan 2's training as kids. I originally thought we might be speaking to a fellow Spartan here, but I'm wondering now if perhaps he's speaking to Kwan Ah or some other character we haven't met yet, revealing the true horrors of the Spartan 2 program. We'll have to wait and see though. And speaking of Spartans, let's finally talk about Master Chief John 117, played by Pablo Schreiber, and the Spartans of Silver Team, who will be working alongside the Chief. We have Vanek 134, played by Bentley Kalu, referred to as the Chief's deputy, a role more commonly fulfilled these days by Fred 104 in the books, though originally often assigned to Kelly 087. In truth, however, Spartan 2 team compositions were often subject to change based on mission needs, so Chief never really had a dedicated second-in-command, at least not during the Human Covenant War. It'll be interesting to see how much of this carries over into the TV show, or if the show will ignore this altogether. Vanek has probably the most unique Mjolnir armor of the team, featuring a unique breastplate, cuisses, and pauldrons, to name a few. He wears a customized version of the EOD helmet, which looks to me to be primarily based on the Halo Reach incarnation. His armor also features some gold highlights, and like Fred, Vanek is often seen wielding a DMR. We next have Riz 028, played by Natasha Kolzak, who we sadly don't see too much of in the trailer. What we do see of her seems to imply that she might be the team's comm or tech specialist, and she wields dual M6 Magnums. Riz's helmet, along with Kai 125's, is a custom new design based on concept art from Halo Infinite. Riz's armor also features red highlights. And then we have Kai 125 herself, played by Kate Kennedy. Kai is probably the most standout of the Spartans in the show, at least to me, thanks primarily to her dyed hair. In the core canon, Kelly 087 used to dye her hair blue before she was conscripted. I'm wondering if that streak of pink in Kai's hair is a callback to that. Kai looks to be the sniper of Silver Team and is potentially fairly knowledgeable, seen working with Miranda keys during the trailer. While hard to see in most scenes, Kai's armor features turquoise accents. Towards the end of the trailer, we get a group shot of Silver Team in full Mjolnir. With the Chief being given his new Halo Infinite armor design, the other Spartan 2s had to follow suit. As much as I would have preferred Mark IV or even Mark V Mjolnir, the armor made for the new show is pretty damn good looking. We can see earlier in the trailer that Spartans have full undersuits, just like we saw in Infinite, and they suit up with the Brock armor mechanism, a device only seen in the post-war era in the core canon. In this group shot, we can see that all 4 Spartans have what is presumably a Silver Team logo on their right breastplate, based on the Blue Team logo that was created for Halo 5. Where the Blue Team logo featured a bird of prey, the Silver Team logo features a wolf. Finally, let's talk about Master Chief himself. Portrayed by Pablo Schreiber, the man seems to have really taken to the character. I believe he is Master Chief, and I'm excited for his take on the character. The Chief has a lot of voiceover in the trailer, some of which is clearly coming through a helmet speaker or from beneath a helmet.
Covenant forces appear to be excavating some kind of object.
And some of which sounds much more like it's being delivered with the helmet off.
When I touch the object?
I think we can safely say that Chief will have speaking roles and screen time with his helmet off. While it's still unclear whether they'll show the Chief's face like they do with other Spartan 2s, I wouldn't be surprised if we see the Chief's, or rather Mr. Schreiber's, fully unhelmeted head on screen. There are tons of clips of the Master Chief throughout the trailer, one of him holding a plasma pistol, which appears to be modeled after the Halo Reach version, another with the Chief pulling a turret from its mount, straight out of Halo 3 or any title afterwards. I can only imagine how hyped people were when this popped on screen. A later shot shows the Chief's surgical scars from his augmentations, followed by him emerging onto a battlefield and being handed an assault rifle by a Marine. I love the visible terror in the Marine's eyes and the look of awe as he hands the Chief the rifle. It feels like I'm being pulled straight into my memories of Halo 3 in 2007. And on the subject of Marines, we got our first real good look at the armor here, and it looks pretty damn good. And perhaps even more interestingly, the armor looks to be a mix of Halo 3 and Halo Wars, with even a few elements of Halo 4 thrown in. It's a solid mix of various Marine armors from across the games, and I love it. Getting back to the Chief though, we absolutely need to discuss this scene with the Forerunner artifact. The artifact seems to be taking the place of the Sigma Octantis 4 artifact from Halo The Fall of Reach as what will direct humanity to Halo. When Chief touches it, the artifact and surrounding rock glow. We can see a Reclaimer symbol and some Forerunner text, which reads Scan and End, a callback to this moment from the CEA terminals. There's additional Forerunner script on screen, though it comes from Forerunner languages that are still being deciphered. We can see symbols that first appeared in Halo 4, and around the outer edges looks to be the same mysterious script first seen on Sandtrap and more recently appearing in Halo Infinite. I might be wrong about that last one, but there's definitely a resemblance, I think. Afterwards, we hear voiceover from the Chief saying he felt something and felt different after touching the artifact. As he does, we get a scene showing the Chief's gauntlet covered in blood, which may be related to this scene at the trailer's end, followed by one of the Chief's hands shaking. While the bloodied hand may have been cut in for the trailer, I think the shaking hand is the aftermath of touching the artifact, perhaps knocking Chief on his feet or even incapacitating him after he touched it. There are plenty of other shots of the Chief in the trailer, of course, but little more to discuss that's directly related to his character, so for now, let's move on. The final character we'll be discussing today, and a perfect lead-in to our discussion of the show's depiction of the Covenant, will be Makee, the human raised by the Covenant. There are plenty of questions to ask following this trailer, but I think we get some hints about Makee's past and her relationship with the Covenant. Portrayed by actress Charlie Murphy, Makee is a standout in the Halo lore. In the core canon, the Covenant declared war on humanity to cover up the fact that humans were the chosen inheritors of the Forerunner legacy. Assuming this hasn't been changed in the Silver timeline, Makee being part of the Covenant will demand an explanation. At this point, many lore fans are under the assumption that Makee was brought up in secret to some degree. I'm thinking at the moment that she was secretly raised by the Prophets and is only deployed with a special operations group of sorts, basically kept secret from the rest of the Covenant. We see her meeting with the Hierarchs here, with an elite guard behind her. I'm wondering if the elites we see in this trailer are Spec Ops elites of some kind. We also get to see Makee in some sort of Covenant garb, which I like to imagine is normally meant for a San Shayum. Perhaps, if Makee is indeed kept secret from the Covenant at large, she's dressed like a San Shayum when she's on High Charity. The real question in my mind, however, is whether Makee is aware of why the Covenant are attacking humanity. Assuming the Covenant's reasons haven't changed, if Makee is aware of the genocide against her species, the show is going to need a pretty good explanation of why she's working with the Covenant. Anyway, while we'll have to wait for the TV show itself to get answers, the trailer gives us some really interesting moments, such as her working alongside Let Golo. Damn cool to see. The scene seems to be Makee boarding a Gladius-class heavy corvette, a ship first seen in Halo Warfleet and seen here being loomed over by a Covenant SDV corvette, which we can see on screen in the background. Interestingly, we can also spot a Synoviet logo on this panel. With that, let's move on to discussing the Covenant at large, and boy is there a lot. First, let's cover High Charity. We finally get a glimpse of the Golden City first seen in Halo 2, including the Anodyne Spirit, the Forerunner key ship that once lay at the city's heart and powered all of High Charity. We also get a scene featuring the 3 Hierarchs, though the location is unlike any we've seen in the games before. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if this was the show's version of the Sanctum of the Hierarchs, but again, we'll see. We don't get a good look at the Hierarchs here, sadly, though their general design seems pretty solid. While I can't show it, a pretty high-quality image of the TV show's version of a Prophet did leak a while back, and in my opinion, I think they look pretty good. We've talked briefly about the appearance of Lekgolo, which are a vast improvement so far over what we got in Halo Nightfall. We get a brief glimpse of a Kig Yar in this trailer as well, which is firmly designed after the Rutian look from Halo 3 and Reach. While it's hard to get a good look at it, the Kig Yar seems to move like a traditional puppet, which I love. It makes the Kig Yar feel more real and grounded, if that makes any sense. Interestingly, this Kig Yar is seen wielding an energy dagger like the ones Elites had in Halo Reach. Speaking of, next, let's talk about the Sangheili. We first get to see one here, which a lot of people initially thought was the Arbiter, and I can't blame them for that. I thought as much when I first saw it. However, this is simply a new armor design, which we can see more clearly later. The armor design does seem to borrow from the Arbiter's armor though, perhaps meant to establish a visual connection between current Sangheili armor and the Arbiter's armor. As for the Sangheili themselves, they're pretty much just straight up H2A Elites, which I think we all saw coming. It's a pretty popular design. It would be cool if we could see more phenotypes and subspecies, i.e. the different forms we see across the games, but I'm not holding my breath. Still, the Sangheili look pretty damn good, even in motion. We can also see that both they and Spartans will be equipped with energy shields. From there, let's discuss the 2 Covenant vehicles we see in the trailer. The Phantom dropship is pretty much just a slight redesign of its Halo 3 or Reach counterparts. It's recognizable as a Phantom and features some additional flair, like a lot of things in the show. It also features additional armament next to its nose turret, allowing the ship to shoot enemies below it. We also get to see the Chief in the wreck of a destroyed Phantom here. Finally though, we have a Banshee. Only seen on screen for maybe a second or two, it looks like the show will be using a version of the Type 26B model first seen in Halo Reach. While that pretty much wraps up the larger topics, I do want to quickly discuss some of the locations and sets we see in the trailer. The trailer opens with a shot of a human city, which looks like it was built into the natural terrain to a degree. Surrounding the city are various towers of unknown purpose. This could be the same world we see under attack later, but it's hard to find any direct visual connection other than the desert environment. Perhaps Kwan Ah's village is located at one of these towers out in the distance. Speaking of, the village Kwan is seemingly from, definitely located on an outer colony, notably has a lot of fairly outdated tech, as many online have pointed out. However, it's important to remember that outer colonies, especially once the Covenant appeared, often had to scrounge older tech for one reason or another. The frontier worlds especially didn't always get the best technology. It might seem weird to see an AK-47 style gun 500 years in the future, but is that any odder than people with Desert Eagles or revolvers in the 26th century? For me, the village shown here is pretty much what I've come to expect for worlds on the edge of human space. This would be especially true if the people seen in these clips are insurrectionists, meaning they'd likely live even further off the grid, so to speak, than any colonist. The identity of this world is still unknown, though I've recently started to wonder if it might be Madrigal. According to the Silver Debrief, Madrigal and the Rubble would have a tighter connection than in the books. Given that Kwan Ah is seen later with Soren 066, who operates out of the Rubble, it doesn't seem like a huge stretch, at least not right now. We also briefly get a look at a location from the previous trailer, this time featuring a warthog driving away from the site. The world this is set on is said to be, quote, both familiar and alien to longtime fans, according to the Silver Debrief, which also refers to this location as a ruin. I'm starting to think this might be a reimagined Sigma Octantis 4, and these ruins might be where the Forerunner artifact is recovered from. Alternatively, as the scene in the original trailer is said to feature Halsey's personal Zhang-He-class courier, a new ship that debuts in the show, this might be a location on Reach, maybe this could be Harvest, or it could even be Chief's homeworld of Eridanis 2. Finally, swinging back to that image of a Phantom dropping behind Kai 125, there's a UNSC tent in the background, which could be a prefabricated memory plastic cubicle, basically a futuristic UNSC tent first described in Halo the Flood and later depicted in Halo Fireteam Raven. With that, we can begin wrapping up this massive breakdown, starting with some episode predictions based on the trailer footage we've seen so far and the recent Silver debrief. According to Frank O'Connor, franchise development director, we'll see within the first episode that Chief and Cortana finding Halo isn't a simple coincidence. While lore fans may know this, many still do not. Given that, here's how I predict the first episode will go, more or less. The episode will start on Kwan Ah's homeworld. Maybe we'll get a sense for how life is in the outer colonies, hear about how it contrasts to the lives of those in the inner colonies or something, but the planet will soon come under Covenant attack. The Spartans of Silver Team soon show up, fighting off the Covenant and rescuing Kwan Ah. The Forerunner relic is also discovered at this time. From there, the Spartans head back to Reach with Kwan Ah and the relic. Upon arriving in Pelican 325, the artifact acts up, providing an opening for Soren 066 to board the craft and rescue Kwan Ah. They take the Pelican and head for the rubble, where Soren gives Kwan the Spartan backstory. Meanwhile, Miranda Keyes is studying the Forerunner relic and mission recordings, discovering the Covenant's search for Halo. And if I were to guess, this might be more or less where the first episode ends. From there, I think the rest of the season will be leading up to the fall of Reach, with the season ending on the famous Pillar of Autumn jump to the Soel system. Alternatively, covering the events of the first Halo conflict might be something they're saving for much further down the line. Overall, the Halo TV show looks pretty damn good. For all my issues with how we got here, I'm cautiously optimistic for this show at this point. The sets and CG look pretty damn good overall, the aliens look fantastic, and the acting is solid from what we've seen so far. The trailer feels like the Halo universe, and that, above all, is what a Halo TV show needs to do. While I feel Halo Forward Unto Dawn managed to nail this, I felt that Nightfall fell short by comparison, and I was admittedly worried that could happen again here, especially when we saw the first teaser. But the show is looking good, and if Twitter is any indication yesterday, it looks like folks in general are hyped for this. If it does well enough, it might even be cool to see some dedicated Silver Timeline spin-off media, who knows. I wouldn't want to detract from core canon, obviously, but if it could be done without negatively impacting the core canon, it could be fun. But these are just my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below, or hop over to the Halo Canon Discord to join the talk. I just created a dedicated channel for the TV show, which premieres on March 24th this year on Paramount+. As the show airs, I'll of course be making episode breakdowns, so look forward to those. Until then, however, thank you for watching, stick around for that Patreon shoutout, and until next time, this has been Halo Canon. First, I'd like to give a big thank you to our Horospus patrons. First, there's Hope, then we have Freight, Discombobulated Sycophant, Justin Montgomery, Man in the Dark, Keisha Dila, Daddy Anarchy, Great Scott Productions, Jumpy Sucks Balls, Ever Corrado, and Embezzled True 1010. Thank you all for your amazing support of the channel. Next, I'd like to thank our theoretical patrons. If you'd like to see your name here or get a direct shout out, check out patreon.com/halocanon. You can simply support the channel or get additional benefits, such as behind-the-scenes materials, including raw audio for upcoming videos, or even shoutouts like this. All patrons now get early access to certain videos as well, and your Patreon title will appear in the Halo Canon Discord. However, your continued viewership is more than enough for me. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and maybe even subscribing to the channel if you aren't already. If you really enjoy my stuff, turn on that notification bell so you can be among the first to see new videos when they release. But for all my fellow Canonites, keep on being awesome.